All right, welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen. We have a very special guest this week, Mr. Brian R. Solomon. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to be back with you.
Appreciate you being here, taking the time today, and do a little deep dive into your career and
Sure.
all your great accomplishments over the years, and just chat wrestling. So looking forward to it.
Me too, always.
So I guess the way we'll start off today is, did you grow up as a wrestling fan, or did you kind of get into it more in your adult life? And what was your first memory of pro wrestling?
Well, I became a fan at about the age of 12 of wrestling, but I didn't start getting super serious about it until probably about 17 or so, 16, 17. I really, it's funny, like right around the age when a lot of people are getting tired of it and moving on,
Right.
I was really ramping up. But my earliest memory, actually, of pro wrestling is pretty early when I was very little, and it's way before I was a fan. So in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, there was a youth center, the Catholic Youth Center, that called Regina Pages Youth Center, that used to have wrestling. And it was WWF wrestling. They had the WWF talent come in, and it was wild. The big stars in the elementary school gym. So I started kindergarten in 1979. Okay, fall of 1979. And I remember this. They were giving us a tour. It was a Catholic school. It was Regina Pages School. They were giving us a tour of everything. We got to see the classrooms. We got to see the gym and the cafeteria. And they took us over to the youth center, which was down the block. And I remember we're walking into the entrance. And outside the entrance, there's one of those big sandwich board advertisements, like folded open.
Yep.
With a big wrestling poster. And it was advertising Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Chief Jay Strongbow grudge match because Valentine had broken Strongbow's leg, right? That was a really famous feud. I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what wrestling was. I thought it was wild. Like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, who is this Indian? What is this? And there's this other guy named Valentine. What a funny name. And it just stuck with me. And actually, years later, I was able to look that show up. Sure enough, it was September 1979, and it was in the middle of that whole feud, Valentine and Strongbow. It had actually died down a little bit. That's why they were taking it to all the tiny shows like that. But that's my first memory of professional wrestling.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, yeah, and that's how it starts. You just see that random poster or a random magazine, and it kind of hooks you in from there.
Absolutely, yes.
So you were a writer. You became a writer for the WWE, and editor from 2000 until 2007?
That's right.
Okay, so you were there quite a long time, and you were there at a pretty prominent era in the world of wrestling. I mean, going in the middle of the Attitude Era, which is arguably, one of the most successful eras ever. How did you get your foot in the door, and how did that whole process come about?
Well, it was all very mundane, actually. I was so into wrestling in the 90s, like I said, as a teenager and as a young adult. And I had been writing a lot about it in the college newspaper, neighborhood newspapers, doing volunteer stuff. And then I kind of gave up on it because I got married. I needed a real job, and I graduated college and all this stuff, and was going for my master's degree. So I was doing other work in publishing, non-related. And it just so happened I was looking for a better job. Like I said, I just got married. I needed to make more money. I was making entry-level money. And New York Times Classified, the paper edition, they don't even print that anymore, the classifieds. And I saw a big WWF logo right in the middle of the classifieds. And I said, oh, I'll never get this, but it'll be fun. I'll apply. You never know. And God, I can tell you, I look back on it now and I remember I don't think I ever wanted anything as badly as this. And I was fantasizing about it and thinking, this is never going to happen. But imagine if it did. And then it actually did. They called me back October 99. I went in for my first interview. They were looking for a copy editor in the publishing and creative services department. So basically a proofreader. And they called me in, and I wound up going back 2 more times for interviews. I found out later there was a lot going behind the scenes. They already hired somebody ahead of me, and then she needed help and this whole thing. And so finally, at the end of at the end of January 2000, they offered me the job. I still remember it clear as day. I'm sitting at my desk at my previous job, H.W. Wilson Publishing Company in the South Bronx. I'm sitting there. I pick up the phone, and it's Barry Werner, who was the publisher of WWF Magazine and Raw Magazine. And I had interviewed with him twice, and he offers me the job. And he offers it to me for more than what for like, oh my God, it was like 50% more than what I was making, and which still was not a lot of money. But I said, I will take it. And I started Valentine's Day 2000. I still remember it. And it was a blast. The first 5 years was like a dream come true. The last 2 years, not. But everybody has that arc of experience, unfortunately, working for WWE. It goes from a dream to a nightmare, usually a lot of times. But still, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Most fun job I ever had by a mile.
So you're walking into a new job, and it's such a prominent, position within the company in the year 2000. So early 2000, the headquarters were located there in Stamford. Obviously, over the years, different addresses. By this point, they were on North Main Street.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They'd been there for a while. They got there in 91. So they'd already been there like 9 years by that point.
So what were the Titan Towers like for you? What was some of the experiences that you had in that famous building?
I don't even know where to start. I was there 7 years. I do know when I came the first time, I'd never been there before. And I was so young, and I was like 25 or whatever I was. And I parked on the street. I didn't even go in the parking lot because the building's in a weird spot for people. Maybe that if you've ever been there, the old building, it's like in the middle of a residential area. It's right on the post road, right on Route 1, right on the border between Stamford and Darien. And it's literally on a block. If you go down the block, it's just people's houses, it's very quiet suburban block. So I parked on that block, and I walked right in the front door, the revolving doors, which in later years would be locked. You can't even go in that way because of all these media ambushes and things. I walked right through those revolving doors. And, I went up, and I'll never forget, I didn't know if I was going to get the job. And I went to the men's room, and I thought to myself, I'm taking a piss in Titan Towers. This is about as good as it's going to get. Like, I'm thinking like that is as far as it's going to go. I'll be able to tell people that will be my great claim to fame. Little did I know, but I mean, God, it was a 4-floor building. And I don't know, some of it's been shown over the years on television. They used to have this nice garden on the roof, and they filmed some stuff on there from time to time. And it was a beautiful view. You could see everything from there. And I used to have lunch there a lot in the nice weather. I mean, there was a gym there. I used it maybe once or twice in 7 years. Not really a physical fitness junkie, but, it was nice to have. It was free for all employees. You could use it anytime, day or night. That was the other interesting thing. If you had a key card, you could get into that building day or night. And there were times before I had kids and stuff, I would be there in the middle of the night just trying to get stuff done, and no one else there but me. They're like vacuuming the rugs. You could go anytime. In fact, I don't know if I should say this, but when I was going to be let go in 2007, I knew it was coming. A lot of people do. And I said, God, if this is really going to happen, I want to have a record of all the work I did there, And I went the night before, late at night. I went in there, and I made a copy of all of the Word files and the documents of all my articles, so I can have it for portfolios and things to show the work I did there. I'll never forget. I put it, believe it or not, I put it on my iPod. If people know, like, iPods had a lot of storage space for other files. It wasn't just music. Yeah. These are just Word documents. They don't take up a lot of space. So I had 7 years worth of articles. I still have it now. I'm very proud of the work I did there. But what a blast we had. I don't even know where. Like I said, they used to film Bite This in this room. We called it the Fishbowl. It was right where our offices were. I would walk 10 feet and I could be in that room. Because I started out on the second floor, and then publishing moved down to the first floor, which is where the gym was. It's where .com was. They wanted us to be near them. It's where like that Fishbowl studio was. And you never knew who was going to be in there. That was fun too. You'd go most of the time. People, have this fantasy. Most of the time, the wrestlers were not there because they would be on the road. They're working. The only time they'd come in is if they had a meeting, if they were doing shows in the area and they wanted to hit the gym for free. And every now and then, you'd go in the cafeteria and you'd see, because I used to eat in the cafeteria when I couldn't go on the roof. They had a beautiful big full service cafeteria with a kitchen. That also spoiled me for any other job. And you could sit there. And I remember you go up there. One time I saw The Rock up there. One time I saw Rikishi up there just having lunch, oh my God, all these different people. And I remember, and a couple of times even I had lunch with them, some of them. I would just sit down, we'd have lunch together and talk. I don't remember at the moment specifics, but there was a lot of surreal stuff that happened. Stevie Richards, I think that's who it was. I had lunch with him there a couple of times, and you just get used to it after a while.
Yeah. You mentioned to Bite This. That was at the time a pretty popular show, I guess you can call it, segment. It was online, obviously. Do you think we'll ever see those files come out? Because I feel like that's a lot of lost media that just
You're right.
There isn't a lot out there. Maybe a few episodes.
You're right. A couple of times I have seen in some of these documentaries, I've seen them use tiny little snippets of it. But that would be great. You're right, because it really was, it broke kayfabe, not to the degree that these things do today. I mean, they really go so far to the point of just taking all the fun out of it. But there were things they wouldn't say even back then. But it was so interesting to see these people candidly talking. Howard Finkel would be there a lot, Kevin Kelly, Jonathan Coachman. They'd have all these guests and things, and they had so much fun in there. I would love to see them do that. Like you said, that is a kind of a treasure trove. Maybe put it on the WWE Vault page. You could run the whole series. They'll probably get around to it at some point.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts of the Vault page? We're used to the network. We're used to things being on Peacock. Now it seems like a lot of the stuff is transitioning to the Vault page, and that's obviously free to the public. It's YouTube. Where do you see things going with a lot of the old footage moving forward?
Well, I think the sad thing that they realized, and I know even from people that are in there, is, there was once this craze to obtain as much old footage as they could get. I was there when it started. And then they really started to realize that there's really not a lot of money in that. It's a very small audience. I'm a part of that audience, but it's a very small audience that cares. It's probably in the tens of thousands, that kind of thing. And so they thought, why are we wasting all this manpower and resources on this kind of stuff? Like, what's the point for what, a few thousand people? And so I think that's why this is happening. And it's also why you started seeing things just stop getting uploaded to the network. Like, there were things that were shown on WWE 24/7 that never made it to the network. So, I mean, I like the YouTube idea. I think in the future, it'll be a great way, I could see where it's going, to make all this stuff available without having to worry about monetizing it, other than you could sell YouTube ads. You could do that. And I know people hate the ads, but that would be a way to maybe make a little money off of it without having to sell a subscription. Now, there's things I like and there's things I don't like, because I've been a subscriber to Peacock and the network from the beginning. So there's some things they've uploaded there that have never seen the light of day, like those Atlanta Omni cards and things like that, and that you would never see. I'm hoping to see, hopefully they put up some of those MSG and Spectrum shows that have never made it to the network. But what I love about Peacock and the network that I don't want to lose is, to be able to binge watch these series. Like, I sat there and I watched Mid-South straight through from 1981 on, the whole damn thing they had. I've done it with Clash of the Champions. I'm in the middle of doing it now with WCW Saturday Night. Like, I don't want that to go away. I mean, I'm the kind of person, I don't want to just have, they put up one episode of World Championship Wrestling. Great. I want to see the whole year, So if they can do that, if they can make it a thing where you get the whole series up there, then I think you're really losing nothing, except maybe having to deal with ads,
Yeah. I'm one of those people that would just eat up episodes of, Spotlight Wrestling and All American from the mid 90s. And, a lot of content that we just haven't gotten to see at Shotgun Saturday Night.
I want to see way more of Wrestling Challenge. They've only put like the first couple of years. I'm hoping the Superstars, WWF Superstars is great. I hope at some point they could clear up the legal nonsense so that they could include the episodes. Where does it start? 91, 92,
Yeah.
because they got sued over the name. I would love to see it go back to 86, the beginning of WWF Superstars of Wrestling. There's so much great stuff in there with, you don't even get the Vince and Jesse years of WWF Superstars. So there's so many different directions they could go for sure.
And it
There,
was
there's I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's WCW Worldwide. None of that has been put out. I mean, that was their syndicated show. It was the only show I could see in New York because we didn't have cable yet.
right.
I would love to see that.
And I know the WWF fans are waiting for Action Zone and Mania, stuff like that.
I was too old for those shows. I know what you mean, like
Yeah.
all that kind of that. Those shows were for kids, but I get what you're saying. I think Action Zone replaced Superstars or Challenge, one of those two. I mean, it was pretty much the same thing,
Yeah.
but Mania was really like a Saturday morning kids show.
Right. And I'm hopeful. There are some
Yeah.
things popping up on the Vault channel, like Sunday Night Slam, which if I ever mention that to somebody, they've probably never heard of it, but obscure things like that are starting to pop up. So it's nice.
Yeah, they put up AWA Super Clash, which I think had already been up there on Peacock, but that was amazing to see. Those Omni cards I'm going crazy for. I just want more and more and more of those things. There's one from December 83, where they brought in the original Sheik, and I wrote about it in my book about the Sheik, and I've never actually seen it. So I would love to see that one. They posted one from a couple of months before that. So I'm holding out hope.
Well, you mentioned some of the territories there. What are some of your favorite territories, back in the day that either maybe got a glimpse of as a fan growing up, or maybe after the fact you've kind of caught up on it?
It's really after the fact, because by the time because I grew up in New York, and so the only wrestling we really got to see was WWF. That was our territory, even before the national expansion. It was our territory. And by the time I got cable, it was 92, and all the territories were gone pretty much. But I mean, just from studying the history and getting into old footage, and I'm not one of these people that only wants to see stuff they saw when they were a kid. Like, I love seeing old stuff that I never got to see. So Mid-South is amazing. That might be my favorite all-around promotion, pound for pound, week to week. Great stuff. I love, I have a soft spot for Detroit big time wrestling, the Sheik's territory, even before I wrote the book. It's just so weird and wild and crazy, and a lot of people don't talk about it anymore. Another one that I've been getting into a lot lately, because I've been checking it out on, one of these. I have the Crispy Lettuce Drive. I don't know, if you know who that is, but
No.
he's got a treasure trove of old wrestling footage. He's on Twitter. I encourage people to seek him out. But I've been getting into Georgia Championship Wrestling, like 81, 82, kind of like their prime years on TBS cable. And it's just fantastic. I'd rather watch that than Monday Night Raw any day of the week. That's just me.
Sure. Now, ticket pricing obviously has changed over the years. I mean, I remember King of the Ring, I think it was 97 in Providence. You could get a seat for $12 on a pay-per-view, and now it is a little more difficult, a lot more difficult for fans to get involved, especially families. If you have a lot of kids and you want to make it a family event, and that's what it's always been about with the different generations. And Vince was always behind that. What's your take on where we are now and how prices just keep skyrocketing?
Well, they priced me out. I can't go anymore. I love taking my kid when he got old enough, and we really can. I was looking at, they're doing a house show tour now, and they're coming to Total Mortgage Arena by me, Bridgeport. $400 for nosebleeds. One, I can't do that. There's no way. Like, I wouldn't even want to spend $400 for both tickets,
Right.
Especially a house show in Bridgeport. I mean, I went to WrestleMania 10 in the Garden in 94, and I had, if you know the Garden, I had seats in the 100 sections, which is like one level off the floor, $50 a seat. And that was the biggest show of the year, prime seats right off the floor in the most famous arena, $50 each.
Wow.
They're pricing people out. I know part of it is what I've heard is they're trying to recoup the huge losses of the debts that UFC has now that they're all in bed together in TKO. I hope that maybe a combination of once they deal with that situation, and then on top of it, if they start to see the ticket sales lag because of this, that maybe they'll come to their senses a little bit and bring them a little more under control, because that's happened before. We'll see. We'll see. Because, I'm of two minds about it. And I talk to a lot of people about this. It's like, okay, I think it's crazy, but they're selling out. So somebody's buying these tickets. The places are packed. And I have to think, look, there are not that many people in the country, in North America, that have a couple of $1,000s to just drop casually on wrestling tickets. So what I think most of these people are doing is just going into deep debt and not giving a damn about it, and probably not just with wrestling, but with a lot of things. And I think that's really unfortunate, because this isn't a finance podcast, but I mean, fiscal responsibility is so important. I think a lot of people have thrown it out the window. There's so many things that I look at like that where I go, okay, yes, I'm not living under a bridge somewhere. If I wanted to, if somebody put a gun to my head, yeah, I could spend $800 for 2 tickets to see this house show with my son.
Yeah.
However, that's insane. And even though I could do it, I'm never going to do that in a million years, because it's so irresponsible and just ridiculous. On principle, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. And, there's been a lot of different iterations over the years of the meet and greets. Now they can be pretty pricey, just like everything else. Over the years, we've had Axxess, of course, WWE World. You mentioned WrestleMania 10. Were you a part of the fan festival that weekend?
Yes, I was. That was the first one they had it was kind of the first one, really. They called it the Fan Fest. It was in the Rotunda. Yeah, that was really cool. And then it became Axxess, and I got to work Axxess one year when I was working there. I went to, of all of them, I went to the greatest one of them all, for my money, WrestleMania 17 in Houston. I was there at the Astrodome, and in the Reliant Center next door, they had Axxess, Fan Axxess, and I worked the publications booth. It was wild, this huge convention hall, and they had people there. Bob Backlund was there signing autographs. Ernie the Cat Ladd was there signing autographs. Bobby Heenan, all these people. It was incredible thinking about it now. Of all people, Peter Mayhew, the guy who played Chewbacca, was there. Still
Really?
to this day, I have no idea why. I took a picture with him, and he was there. It was so cool by that point. It had gotten huge.
Yeah. And what are some of your memories of that very first fan festival in 1994?
It was modest compared to what they do now, because part of it was they hadn't even started the Hall of Fame yet. They were just getting it off the ground later that year. So they didn't have a lot of memorabilia. They hadn't reached out to a lot of people like they have over the years to get a lot of stuff. Their archives were kind of a joke. It was just like a holding place. They didn't really put any care into that kind of stuff, but it was still fun. It was fun for kids. There were activities and things. They had this thing where you could put your hand up against Andre the Giant's hand and that sort of thing. And, they had the Undertaker's hearse was there. So, it was kind of fun, but it was modest compared to what they would do later.
Yeah. Obviously, WrestleMania 1 was such an important event in wrestling history. They kind of put it all on the line and rolled the dice. What's your take on what went into that, kind of Vince cherry picking the top talents from all the territories and then just kind of putting together this, super card eventually after he had all those talents in the company for a little while and getting the celebrities involved. And, if that didn't become as big as it had, what do you think it would have happened and where would we be now?
Well, I think that what would have happened is I don't think he would have gone out of business right away. I think that's a little melodramatic when they make those comparisons. I think it would have hurt badly. Because what you got to remember is in 84, in late 83, 84, when they started going national, there was still a lot of heated competition in the wrestling business. There were a lot of players on the board. And what they did was a lot of bluffing. They really were bluffing and trying to make it look like they were much more big league than they were. They were still fairly regional. They were making forays out in the rest of the North America, but Northeast was still their base. New York was still their hometown. And they were, Vince was kind of like this fast talking salesman that was trying to get this across. Oh, we are the big leagues of wrestling. And I think when that started to become reality was after WrestleMania 1. And I don't think it fully became reality until WrestleMania 3. That is when they became what they were pretending they were for the 3 years before that. It's when it actually happened. But if WrestleMania 1 was not a success, they would still be in that boat of being one of the competitors fighting for the pie. Definitely the most aggressive one and the most well-equipped one, but it still would have been anybody's game at that point. And with that kind of failure and losing money and things, if they continued on that path, yeah, they probably would have been out of business in a couple of years for sure. But that's not what happened. And before you know it, the success of WrestleMania is what got them on NBC. And them being on Saturday Night Live with WrestleMania 2 gets them on NBC with the whole Cyndi Lauper MTV thing, which that was their biggest thing before WrestleMania, was getting on MTV. That was a very big deal, but it still wasn't as big as NBC or WrestleMania. It kind of was the ramping up of that. But then once but it was not certain even in the beginning. WrestleMania 2 was nowhere near the success of WrestleMania 1, critically, commercially, everything. So, it still could have gone anyone's way, because 86, too, Jim Crockett Promotions was on fire. They were doing great. They were expanding. It really was not a sure thing until, like I said, until 87. And then I think it was all but over, honestly, at that point.
Now, the early 2000s, why don't you walk us through a full day, an average day for you as writer? What does your day look like? You show up at the Titan Towers. Are there some meetings? Who sits in on these meetings? What's your process like going in?
Well, I was in the publications department, so we would, I don't know. I mean, I'd be working on my articles for the month. Getting my interviews done. Most of them were done over the phone. I would go on the road a few times a year, and I would go to all the local TVs and try to get live interviews and all the local house shows. But most of my work was done in the office. It was like an office job. It wasn't like, and every now and then weird, surreal things would happen, like the great Khali being taken on a tour and towering over everybody's cubicles, or Howard Finkel walking superstar Billy Graham through, and things like that would happen. But most days it was an office job. We goofed around, we had fun, we watched wrestling, but it was an office job. The meetings we would have would be mainly like pitch meetings to lay out like what's going to be in the next issue. Let's get everyone on the same page, who's writing what. But, that would be no different than any magazine really at the time.
Sure. Now, do you have a favorite WrestleMania over the years?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it's 17.
17, yeah.
Yeah.
And what makes that for you?
Yeah, I know. I think I'm biased partly because I was there and I was a part of the whole weekend. WrestleMania 3, I know a lot of people point to that, and that was a great one, and that's the one that put them on the map, and it'll always be remembered probably by a large portion of people as the greatest. But for me, 17 was the absolute peak of the Attitude Era. Like right after that is when things started dropping off. It was right when they bought WCW. The company seemed unstoppable. You had Austin and Rock. You had the whole My Way or the Highway. The greatest WrestleMania theme song ever that people still try and copy it today. That whole promo package with the Limp Bizkit song. I'm not even a fan of Limp Bizkit, but that worked. And I also think, you had I know it's very tainted now, but you had Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit on there, which even though, it's uncomfortable to talk about, one of the greatest matches of that decade. You had the first Triple H versus Undertaker WrestleMania match. You had Chyna winning the women's title, which was a big deal at the time. What else? And the main event, which I didn't even, you had the Gimmick Battle Royal, which for people like me, so much fun. And it made the after party very interesting. You had Motorhead, performing for Triple H, and then I think didn't they have Kid Rock live doing the song for the Undertaker? I think they did. It was absolutely insane. Or he had dancers or something. And then the main event. Now I will stand by this: Steve Austin versus The Rock at WrestleMania 17. Aside from the finish, which was a big mistake, the match itself is the greatest WrestleMania main event ever, as far as for a match. It's the best. I mean, those guys were at the top of their game. And so the whole package, and being in the Astrodome of all places, the history of that place. It was, I believe, the first WrestleMania in a stadium since 8 in 1992. So that was also a long time coming too. And it was just spectacle. I can't stress it enough.
And what can you share about the after party? For such a big WrestleMania like that, what kind of things did you see there?
Well, there were a lot of fun things. The Rock was there mingling around. It's one of the only times I got to be around him because he was already becoming part time by that point. They had a table. I thought this was fantastic. There was a table there at the party where it was all the old school gimmick guys. They were all hanging out together. So like Kamala's sitting there, the Bushwhackers, the Barry Darcell, the Repo Man, Doink the Clown. They were all sitting together at this table. And I'm like, man, I'm looking at that table and I'm looking over there and Motorhead. They had their own table. Motorhead, Lemmy and Motorhead.
Wow.
They're sitting there at their own table. Everybody's having a good time. I remember Bobby Heenan. I remember this well because I had talked to Bobby at the Fan Axxess thing and we talked a lot. Bobby Heenan was on a mission. God rest his soul. He was on a mission to get his job back that night. He was trying so hard to schmooze with Vince, and he was hunting him down the whole night. I remember because I had spoken to him the day before, so I wanted to strike up another conversation. And he was so single-minded. I remember he was looking at me, but he was looking through me. And I remember him saying, like, have you seen Vince? Is Vince around? Where's Vince? And I pointed him towards Vince, and he made a beeline. Because, it was sad. He didn't get his job back. Mean Gene got rehired, but he didn't. And I thought that was unfortunate. But there were so many of those kind of interesting things. I had my wife at the time, in order to get into the party, you needed to have it was employees only and talent only. You needed to have a pass. My wife didn't have a pass. So we snuck her in. We found a way to sneak her in. Like we had a large group of people, of employees. And like we put her in the midst of us, just in a bunch, like we surrounded her like a phalanx of WWE employees, and we got her into the party. I remember Chris Jericho and I think he had just gotten married, if not maybe his fiance. They're still married. And I remember he was standing by the like the smorgasbord buffet thing, and he's holding her handbag, her pocketbook. And he's just sort of like looking like defeated and holding this like sparkly woman's handbag. And I turned to my wife and I remember going, man, I feel better now. Every husband is like that. Even Chris Jericho has to hold his wife's foofy handbag at parties. I feel a little bit better now, So there were things like that. It was fun.
That's great. Now, around that same time, actually that same year, 2001, WCW was purchased by the WWF.
That was a week before that.
Yeah, that's crazy. I remember they kind of panned and showed a few of them up in the skybox there. And I guess initially it was supposed to be a little more than that, but that's what it ended up being.
Yeah.
So WCW, were you a fan at all? Did you kind of tune into both growing up? And what was your take on that purchase? And in that moment, what did you feel about that?
It was wild. I mean, we got an all-staff email at our desks saying, in a very matter-of-fact way, what had happened, that we'd bought our competition. When I started there, the Monday Night Raws the wars were still going on, even though WCW was in the toilet by 2000. It was not, there was no, it was already decided who was winning that. But it was still such a huge deal, and we were all very innocent at the time thinking, we knew the plans they had, and we thought this is going to be the greatest thing ever. They wanted to run WCW as a separate show. I remember the creative services department developing new WCW logos and things for the talent, and they were very serious about it, and they wanted to do, have them interact only at certain times, like do like a World Series of wrestling. And the whole thing just slowly started to unravel, and it was very sad to watch what a bust it became, sadly, over the course of 2001 and 2.
Now, as a kid, one of my best memories were the wrestling magazines. And, you were a part of that, obviously. But seeing them as a kid and showing up, you're going food shopping, and there's, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, PWI 500, and you would just get so excited to see the newest issue. We've lost that, obviously, and now everything has kind of gone digital. And do you see wrestling magazines ever making a comeback in a newsstand capacity in any way, even if it's on a smaller scale?
Well, I write for both of the big ones that are still out there, Pro Wrestling Illustrated and Inside the Ropes. And I think I think the key now is I don't know about the newsstand thing. That's tough. That wide distribution model is very tough. I do think there would be a market. Excuse me. There would be a market in select markets, specialty stores, supermarket like checkouts. But bigger than that, I think online sales. I think limited runs. You do like a 10,000, 20,000 issue run. There's definitely enough people out there, especially on the internet, that can support those kind of things. I think, especially if you do specialty kind of ideas, like you do like a nostalgia magazine, or I had a great idea that I think, we've come so far now in the post kayfabe era that I think it would be a lot of fun if there was a wrestling magazine that was set up like the Weekly World News and it was 100% kayfabe, the whole thing, cover to cover. I think there's a lot of people would get a kick out of that. That would be fun. So I think those kind of things, yes, but it can't be the same model that it was years ago. That is over with, sadly. Yeah. Very sad for people like me who actually enjoy reading.
Right.
we're a dying species who actually enjoy reading things that are more than just a paragraph. Yeah.
And in today's world of wrestling, you see the John Cena retirement tour. It's pretty much as big as it gets in today's day and age for wrestling. Obviously, Cody, the new guy in town, but
Yeah.
beyond Cody, who is the next John Cena? Who do you think is that next big guy to just kind of take it to the next level? And is it somebody who's there already?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be really boring on that and say I think Braun Breaker definitely is well positioned to be that type of guy. I think he's good as a face or as a heel, and I think he could be that kind of cool, badass face that people, can get behind. I think that's an easy one. There's a few people that I think have a lot of potential to be big stars that I see coming up, and I mean, he's the one that I feel like is really in a prime position to go as far as they want to have him go.
How long have you been a contributor for Pro Wrestling Illustrated? What's that experience been like?
I started contributing on a kind of occasional basis right after I left WWE in 2007 because I was good friends with a guy named Frank Vitucci, who was Bill Apter's photo editor, photo assistant. And then he came to work for us as the photo director at WWE. And he made the connection. So I'm doing like occasional articles for them for years. And then in 2019, right before the pandemic, I started really pushing hard into that to the point where I became a monthly contributor. I pitched them some ideas I had for columns and things. I had a little more free time on my hand, and especially when the pandemic hit, and I'm just home. I became, now I have 2 monthly columns in PWI. I get to do the occasional interview and feature. Every month I've got big, long features in Inside the Ropes, and it's been great. I'm writing every month now for these 2 different publications.
That's awesome. Now, when it comes to wrestling, you've been a fan for so long. It's kind of a common question, but your Mount Rushmore, different eras included, could be any time. What does that look like?
I think those things are impossible to do. I see them all the time because, especially, I'm not one of these people where I'm like the greatest of all time and I'm only talking about the last 20 years. If you're going to say all time, it's got to be all time. Wrestling's been around for 100, 150 years. So you can't. I mean, because how do you compare Strangler Lewis to John Cena? Like, on what metrics can you do that? So I feel like you got to do it in categories like the biggest draws, the biggest talkers. You could do eras, or decades. You could do that. Like, a lot of times I think about it in terms of the biggest stars ever, the biggest name stars. And so I think if you do that, it's kind of like, it's probably like Jim Londos, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, maybe. I mean, like, it's tough to do because it's very subjective. Gorgeous George. I mean, the people that transcended all of wrestling and were massive draws. Stone Cold Steve Austin, massive draw, but just for a very short amount of time. That's his biggest drawback. Like, it's less than 5 years, his run really in that spot. And if you're talking about talking, the best talkers, it's like Dusty Rhodes, Superstar Billy Graham, Ric Flair. I don't know who would be the fourth one. Maybe The Rock. But my gripe with The Rock is that as great as he is, it's all catchphrases. It's all scripted stuff. Whereas a guy like Dusty Rhodes could just go.
Yeah.
and speak with passion, and like it wasn't just I'm going to hit my catchphrase and get a pop. Like you
Yeah.
believed in him, that kind of thing. So like I said, that thing is difficult to do. That Mount Rushmore. It's like, what are the criteria? Like, what are you basing it on?
Right. Now, when it comes to WrestleMania, first time going international with Saudi Arabia coming up in a year and change since Canada. What is your take on that? Going all the way out that way and kind of not skipping out, but I feel like England has kind of been maybe the next stop, in a lot of the fans' minds. They thought that's where it was going to hit next.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake. I mean, certainly it's going to put a lot of money in their pockets. Again, I think they're desperate to lift some of this debt off their back, but I think it's generating a lot of ill will. It's leaving fans feeling left out. This has happened in wrestling before. Crockett Promotions did this when they started moving into places like Chicago and Texas, and the fans got pissed off. Even look, when WWF went national, their bread and butter markets like the Garden and things, the attendance actually started to drop. People don't know this. The hottest attendance at the Garden was like 70 through 84, believe it or not,
Yeah.
where it was monthly sellouts, Felt Forum, the whole thing. When they start to go national, those crowds start to dip, partly because, they're coming less often. People are watching it more on TV. And also, I think there was a little bit of bitterness of being turned off that this isn't our thing anymore as much as it was. So they got to be careful of stuff like that. They got to be careful of trading in the short-term benefits of all that money they're getting with the long term. You don't want to lose your fan base. You don't want to price out the fan base. You're not going to see these people that go to WrestleMania every year going to this one. I mean, maybe a tiny fraction. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to get, how many American fans are you going to get going there? How many Canadian fans? I mean, come on, That's why I think the smartest thing, and it looks like he may do something like this, the smartest thing Tony Khan could do is fill that vacuum. Have a gigantic wrestling weekend, that weekend, a mega show, and make the whole weekend about AEW and create that whole indie ecosystem that WrestleMania always has. Come to us. Have your conventions. Have your indie shows that week in our city. You're not going to do it in Saudi Arabia. Do it here. I'm not saying that's going to change the whole balance of power in wrestling, but that is going to be a big shot across the bow, and it can only help AEW. If they do something like that, that is a choice opportunity for them.
And how do you feel, where does AEW fall? Obviously, they're the number 2 company right now, but you have TNA kind of creeping up. Do you think TNA will ever kind of snatch that spot, or do you think AEW is pretty safe where they are?
I think it's very possible. And I think that's WWE's master plan. I think they want TNA. I also think that's another reason why they don't really look to be wanting to buy it, even though a lot of people think they are. There's been a lot of refuting of that recently, that's not really their plan. I may be wrong. I think that they're trying to position them as number 2 and a number 2 that they could work with. That's going to be a safe number 2. They're not going to threaten them or overtake them, a safe number 2, and it'll bury AEW. I think the biggest roadblock in that happening right now is the TV situation. Like TNA is stuck on a cable channel that a lot of people don't have. They have a pay service that a lot of people aren't going to invest money in paying for a product that has a limited fan base. If they were able to get on a major cable outlet or a major streaming outlet, I think that is a very real possibility that their numbers, their ratings and things could surpass AEW. And that could especially happen down the road if, with the AEW situation and dwindling as far as they have, I don't think the Khans will ever really pull the plug because they have their money's limitless. But I think what could realistically happen is at a certain point, the Warner networks could go like, why are we having this on our channels? Like we could just run, reruns of Big Bang Theory and get better numbers than this. And that could happen. So if one or both of those things happen, you absolutely could see TNA overtake them as the number 2 company.
Yeah. Now, your time in the WWE, who would you say was most influential or just most helpful kind of guiding you through while you were there?
Well, I mentioned Barry Werner, our publisher. He was really a great boss, one of, if not the best bosses I ever had. He really looked out for us and he nurtured me and supported me. He was a journalist, he was in sports journalism, and he really helped me. He trained me. I walked in the door there as just a proofreader. By the time I left, I was a senior editor and a managing editor, and I understood the magazine business. And, he taught me so much about writing that kind of stuff. Also, Howard Finkel was a big help to me. He really took me under his wing because he saw that I was like an amateur historian and I was interested in the history. And that was kind of his role too. And he kind of mentored me a little bit. And he would always put me over. If ever there were other people around and he saw me, he would come over and shake my hand and say hi because he knew it would give me the rub and impress everybody else that I was around. So he was a big one. I know I'll leave people out, but I mean, Kevin Kelly was always very kind and helpful to me when I was there, when he wasn't ribbing me and trying to get a rise out of me. Shane, I have to say, Shane could be tough to work for. I'm not going to lie. Larger than life personality, a very nice guy, but he sometimes had these kind of demands and expectations that we could not meet, and a lot of them were unrealistic. But still, a good person, a decent person, and he also helped me a lot to advance my career and things like that. I mean, I would have liked to have gone even further. I wanted to be the one running the department, and I would talk to him about that. But they really wanted more of somebody with an outside proven track record. And, I was a homegrown talent, and that wasn't going to be me. But he still had a great influence on my career there for sure.
Now, you mentioned Howard being one of the helpful people there. That was actually going to be my next question. Any personal stories that you can share of Howard? You said you saw him walk through with Billy Graham, and he'd kind of joke around sometimes with bringing people into the office. But any personal stories with Howard over the years?
Yeah, he was great. He had his office on the fourth floor, which was the top floor where the executives were, right outside the McMahon's suite. And I remember at the time, I think he was sharing it with somebody, maybe Dr. Tom or maybe Kevin Kelly, Terry Taylor, I think it was Terry Taylor. And a big part of their job is they would watch a lot of the tapes of the other wrestling companies to see what was going on, scout talent, see what they were doing, and then they would report to Vince, who didn't have time to keep up with all that. And so that was important. He and I were also, I was responsible for distributing the Wrestling Observer newsletter around the building. I've told Dave this. I'm sorry to say, I had the subscription and I used to make a bunch of copies, run them off. And because these people did not want to have their names on a subscribers list. And one of the people on my weekly rounds was Howard. And there were other people too. And so I'm pretty sure that Howard's probably eventually wound up on Vince's desk. I think that's very easy to imagine. But so I remember he was a big sports fan. He was a New York Mets fan, and God, I'm going to get it wrong. I think he was Mets and Jets. I don't know. But he was maybe Giants. He was so passionate about sports and just like a nice, decent guy. I mean, that's the best I could say. And we would always have fun. We would compare trivia with each other. Like I remember one time I pointed out to him, I don't know if this has changed since then, but at that time I said, the only WrestleMania that was ever not held on a Sunday, because we were running all the dates of the WrestleManias for this package, and he had all the dates of every WrestleMania. And I said, Howard, the date for WrestleMania 2 is wrong. And he goes, no, Brian, I think you're wrong. I'm going to show you a calendar from, April of 1986. And this is the Sunday, April 5th. And I said, yeah, but Howard, that year they had it on a Monday. He goes, are you sure? I said, yes, that's the only time. It wasn't on Sunday. It was on Monday. And he looked into it and he goes, Brian, you were right about that. I think one day you're going to take my place here as the resident historian. And I remember he was very impressed by that. It was really fun being around him because it gave me a lot of confidence too. He remembered me years later. I saw him at a convention doing a signing when he was kind of semi-retired and they let him do these things. He called me over by name. I hadn't seen him in close to a decade. And I'm thinking, I'll go over and say hi. There's no way he'll remember me. I was with my kids. He pointed me out, called me over by name to his table. We all took a picture together. It was just so nice. Like to this day, I still can't believe that he remembered my name because, I was around him, but we weren't like speaking every day. He remembered my name.
Such a nice guy and just an asset to the business. He meant so much, and certainly missed.
For sure.
So interactions with the McMahon family. You mentioned Shane. How about your very first interaction with Vince? Do you remember that?
My first interaction. Oh man. I don't know. The first one. Mm, it might have been when we. It might have been in one of these staff meetings, because when we started working for Shane at the beginning of 2002, where we were directly under Shane, he started putting us in Vince's orbit a lot, and we didn't like being there. But I would go to a lot of these board meetings, and I think that might have been the first time was one of those board meetings. And I think he didn't really address me directly at this one, but it was like, that's the first time I got to really see him in action. And there would be a lot of board meetings after that where I would be directly addressed and sometimes dressed down by him at these meetings. So that was a unique experience.
So we talked about PWI a little bit, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Growing up, some of the things I would look forward to the most was the PWI Almanac, which would come out every year, and I'd see it at newsstands, and you didn't always see it everywhere. It was you had to find it. It was just tough to find, and there were only 3 or 4 copies out there at each location. And I saw in a previous interview that you had done, you were a fan of those almanacs as well. Fast forward the WWE Encyclopedia with Brian Shields. What was your take on that when you first saw something, so large and comprehensive?
Yeah, my take was I wish I had gotten to work on that, because it was after I was gone. Brian Shields, I think also Keith Elliott Greenberg helped out with those, and I was gone from the company, and Keith at least was occasionally freelancing for them, and I haven't done anything for them since I left. And I thought, wow, this is exactly the kind of thing I would have loved to work on when I was there, because I love those PWI almanacs. That was such a big deal. They started them really even before the internet was that big of a thing. I think 96 was the first year, and that was a treasure. They stopped doing it now because all that info, again, you can get online now. But it was like, oh my God, I was waiting for it for months. They were advertising it. I'm thinking, this is too good to be true, and this is too good to be true. I can't believe this. And I finally got it when it came out, and I devoured it. Like, I read through all the title histories like I was reading a novel, just every single name, every date, the timeline, the incredible photos they had. Unfortunately, I think every year it got a little less interesting to me, because as they had more and more new material to put in, like the new pay-per-view results and new everything, new 500s and things, a lot of the older stuff would get phased out, and all the great old photos and all the historical information that I cherish the most. And so every year there'd be a little less of that. And so it became less interesting to me. But that first one, man, I got rid of it, and I kicked myself. I have a couple, but I don't have that first one, which was the best one.
Yeah. And so Blood and Fire, let's talk about that. You've come up with so many amazing, books at this point, but Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real life story of wrestling's original Sheik. What inspired you to write about him specifically, and kind of tell us about the process of that book coming out?
Yeah. Well, I published that book almost 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I had pitched it initially in 2019. And I hadn't written anything wrestling related in quite a while. I published Pro Wrestling FAQ in 2015. And I started thinking, like, I think I'd like to do another wrestling book. And I had some ideas and I thought to myself, the thing that made the Sheik stand out to me was I really thought there was nobody in wrestling, especially in those days, you could say nobody really in wrestling that's not wrestling today, at least, who was a bigger star than him, who didn't have a book about him. And I still stand by that, because not even Gorilla Monsoon was as big a star as the Sheik. That's a fact. And so I thought, this has to be done, especially now because his name is starting to fade. At that time, I thought, when I was a kid, you still knew who he was if you were a wrestling fan. He was old and decrepit, but he was still out there, and he was in Japan. He was doing this, he was doing that, being in a nut job. And I thought, wow, that would be a great figure, because he was kayfabe to the hilt. Nobody knows about him and his life. And I thought, too, like I said, I was always interested in Detroit wrestling. It was such a quirky territory. At some point, it was the hottest in the business pretty much. And then it just flamed out years before the WWF came in. And I thought, that's interesting too. So I made the book about both those things. And the more I dug into the Sheik's life, Eddie Farhat's life, through records and military records, personal biological records, Ancestry.com, newspapers, I thought, wow, this is fascinating, learning about his family life, where his family came from, and the story just started to take shape. That book, like I've said many times, was like archaeology. And I loved learning so much about this person while I was writing that book.
And you mentioned it's already been about 4 years. Can
Yeah.
fans still purchase that book? If so, where is
Oh,
that
yeah.
available?
Oh, yeah. You can get it wherever books are sold. I mean, it's still available on Amazon or anywhere else. I mean, at this point, brick and mortar bookstores may not have it in stock anymore because it's an older title, but they will order it. It's still in print. You can, have if it's not available, but obviously the easiest way is going to be Amazon.
Awesome. Well, you're the host of the Shut Up and Wrestle podcast. What inspired you to start a podcast, and who have you some of your favorite conversations been with so far?
I've been thinking about doing a podcast for a long time before that. I started in 2022, and I didn't know what I wanted it to be, because even a couple of years before that, I was toying with it. I was trying to find a good co-host. I thought it might be about news and history combined. And then I thought, screw the news. Everybody's talking about that. Everybody is talking about what happened on Monday Night Raw. No, I want it to be old school, vintage wrestling. And my unwritten rule was it's got to be at least 20 years old for us to talk about it. And the other thing that pushed me into it is I thought I could have a different guest every week. That would be my quote co-host kind of. And our subject matter would change every week depending on who the guest was. It could be anything. I've talked about everything from wrestling in the 19th century up until, up to ruthless aggression stuff. So, I mean, and anywhere and everywhere. And Brian Last at Arcadian Vanguard was kind enough to approach me the second I announced I wanted to do this, because I originally thought no one's going to, I'm nobody. I'm just do it independently. And he reached out to me and said, no, you're crazy if you don't do it with me. You got to put it on my network. I said, Brian, I didn't even think you'd have the slightest interest. Otherwise, I would have asked. And that has helped me find a wide audience. So I can't thank him enough. And I've had so many interesting ones. Ken Patera was so colorful and amazing to talk to. The Blue Meanie I've had on several times. I love talking to all the authors and historians, Tim Hornbaker, Steve Johnson, Greg Oliver. I even include, I've had Rob Van Dam. I had Adam Pearce, who is the only person who's come on the show who is currently an active WWE person, works for the company now. He came on, you name it. It's been a dream come true talking to people that, and another thing is I know most of them. And that's the lazy part of it is I thought to myself, Brian, this is great because you don't have to cold call people. You don't have to hustle and introduce yourself. You have enough people on your contact list that know you that you could have years worth of guests. And so far that's been true. I have had years worth of guests. I had Jim Cornette. I had Dave Meltzer. I had Ross Hart, Brett's brother, Rob Van Dam. It's just like, and these are all people that I can just text or message and just say, hey, you want to do this show? What do you think? Kevin Kelly. I mean, that's part of it too, is that it doesn't require a lot of work.
Right. And the hits just keep on coming. Your latest release, The Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon.
All right. I thought you forgot about it, Joe. I'm excited. Okay.
Oh, no. Wanted to save that for the end. That's the new one.
Thank
So
you.
let's talk about that. How did that come about? You recently had a wonderful, successful book signing. The family was there. Let's dive into that. Let's talk all about it. And where can fans get that?
Well, again, wherever books are sold. I mean, people always ask me that about my books, and they're like, how do I get this book? And I always say the same way you get any other book you want to buy, Barnes & Noble's got it. Amazon, Books A Million, that's a big chain here in the U.S. In Canada, they have a similar one to Barnes & Noble. I forget what it's called. I should know that. I think it's Indigo. I think it's called Indigo.
Okay.
They carry it. In Canada, you can also order directly from ECW Press, the publisher. That's a good idea over there because you don't have to worry about postage. Ordering it from them in the US, unfortunately, costs a lot in postage. But in Canada, you could do that. Also, local bookstores, you can find it there because it's brand new. And if they don't have it, they'll order it. It's available in print and digital. And the audiobook, for everyone that has been asking, December 2nd. And I'm narrating it myself. The other thing is also UK and other international markets. It'll be available in November. So very easy to get right now for sure. It's everywhere.
Awesome. Why don't you tell us about that book signing? And, you had some wonderful pieces on display there. Tell us all about that.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about the book launch.
Yeah.
We had that at the Illicit Brewery in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is about 15 minutes from where I live. And we had such a great turnout. Friends came from far and wide. Listeners came from far and wide. I had people that came from Long Island, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and that's a haul for a lot of people to come out for something like that. Bob Smith, who's a great podcaster and a magazine legend, he came out. Tom Burke, the great historian, and his whole crew. Jill Clark, who used to be the makeup designer for WWE for decades. Brian Kunzman, who's an NXT producer today. And the biggest coup of all was the Morella family, Gorilla's family. They came up from Jersey. His daughters, Valerie and Sharon, with their husbands. Valerie's twin sons, Gino and Joey, they were there. And Joey brought his fiance, and it was his fiance, Jackie. And it was like, I was so honored. And they brought all that great memorabilia from home. They had the kayfabe license plate, the famous one. They had the T-shirt from his retirement ceremony at the Spectrum in 1980. They had the belt medallions from the United States tag team titles that Killer Kowalski and Monsoon held in the 1960s. All this incredible stuff, and we put it out on the bar on display for everybody to come check out.
And without giving too much away, what can fans expect with the Irresistible Force?
Well, I don't care about giving stuff away because it's such a big book. There's so much ground to cover. We'd never be able to give even more than the tip of an iceberg. But so you're going to find two things, which I'm really proud of. You're going to find more stuff about Gorilla Monsoon than you ever knew, things that have never been gathered together in one place about his real life and about what a crucial part he played in that company, which is now the biggest wrestling company in the history of the world. And he was one of the cornerstones of it, literally. Well, not literally a stone, but you know what I mean? Like he had 25% ownership. He helped to build this company. And what you're also going to find, and I think this is important, is it's like I did with the Sheik book. It's intertwined with the history of the company now known as WWE in its early decades. So everything that was going on around him. So you're going to learn stuff from the 1960s through the 1990s. Including stuff you don't hear as much about the 60s and 70s as you do about the 80s and 90s, especially the 60s. I tried to break it down because there's really no footage from the 60s. I tried to break it down in such granular detail that you really get a feel for what that company was like in the 1960s and those kind of things. And, what his relationship was with the national expansion in the 80s and what it was like being on the ground floor of that. And watching it grow. All that stuff is also baked into the book. So it's not just a life story. I call it the life and times of Gorilla Monsoon for a reason. It's not just a catchy title.
I look forward to picking up a copy myself. I was always a big fan of Gorilla, so really looking forward to that read. And, the work that you've put out has been phenomenal thus far. So I encourage all the fans to definitely pick up a copy of this. The Irresistible Force and Blood and Fire, which obviously, like you said, is still available. Do take advantage of that for sure. What advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Boy, that's a big question. It depends what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do. Like I've been very lucky. I want to make it clear. The work I do, I've pretty much been a nonfiction writer all this time. The work I do is always contracted. I don't have an agent. I don't pitch ideas around. That's a much harder thing to do. And see if in other words, I don't write a book and then try to sell it to somebody. That could be a heartbreaking effort. So I always work out the deals ahead of time. I get a contract. I know how much royalty advances I'm going to get. I know for sure they're going to publish my book, and then I go to work on it. So, I'm very lucky in that way, honestly. I've never had to go through that torture of having to sell my book and not knowing if anybody even wanted it. So, I mean, if you can make that happen, that's a great deal to try to get. You want to, if you're writing nonfiction, you really want to think about who your audience is going to be. You invest a lot of time and money and time away from your family and things, maybe not money, but definitely time and effort. So you got to think to yourself, like, what's the interest level? And I don't mean that just means you just write about the most popular mainstream things. Even if it's a niche thing or an esoteric thing, you have to think, okay, is there enough interest in that? Is there enough of a, if it's a niche book, fine. If you have a niche market that's going to love it, great, work on that. But it can be a fool's errand, especially if you care about having an audience, if you're not just an academic writer, right? You got to think about that. And the other thing I think, because a lot of people talk about self-publishing, I've never self-published. For some people, that works. I always like the idea of the legitimacy of being published through a real publisher, because then you feel like your work is of quality. I don't mean to be a snob, but anybody can self-publish if they have the money to put into it. It doesn't matter if your book is garbage or not. If you get greenlit through a publisher, they have confidence in you. It makes you feel good about the work you're doing. Now, the best part about self-publishing, though, is you get potentially to make a lot more money, because you make a much higher percentage. Like, I think if you publish through Amazon, you can make like 50% of the profits or something. Whereas with me, the royalties are only like a couple of percentage points. But the difference is I get an advance. I get paid a royalty advance that's guaranteed. And then beyond that, you get paid if your royalties exceed that advance. So if you self-publish, you have the potential to make more money. You could also make no money. If nobody buys the book, you're screwed. You're not making anything. Yeah. Whereas if you do through a publishing company, your potential is less to make money, but the money is more guaranteed, right? If that makes sense. Yeah.
So fast forward many years from now, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be?
As far as professionally, which I think is what you mean, and in the world of wrestling, I would like to have a legacy of somebody who illuminated wrestling history and helped to get other people interested in wrestling history to think beyond just the wrestling they're familiar with, the wrestling they watched as a kid, to go beyond that, take an interest in the history of this thing that you enjoy so much. And I try to do that in an engaging way where people can enjoy my reading. It's not dull. It's not boring. It's not like reading a textbook. I try to make people fall in love with it the way that I fell in love with it. If I could do that, that would be a great legacy.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate you coming on the show, and great success for the Irresistible Force moving forward.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's great to be back with you, and it's great to talk to you anytime.
Appreciate it. Brian R. Solomon, thanks so much again for being here. It's the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, guys.